an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Obelisk Gate, chapters 9, 10, and 11. Nassoon needed. You've got a big job ahead of you. And Shafa lying down. In these chapters, we find out exactly what it is that Nassoon is expected to do. In short, it is catch the moon. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I'll just go ahead and do that. And then we find out a little bit more about Shafa, and I hate it, and I hate it, and I hate it, and I hate it. I hate it. Oh, guys, I'm just not ready for this episode. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Huge thanks to Jason for commissioning this episode. It's really funny because this is actually, normally I don't have Wednesdays open, which is when I am recording this. This is a Wednesday morning, and I accidentally left the Wednesday, I didn't mark it off. So normally I record Twilight during the day on Wednesday, and I just do one commission in the morning, but I'm going to have 3 today as if it were a Tuesday. So it's going to be a busy day coming up. So if anybody wants to hang out with me all day, there's more to come. So yeah, these chapters, y'all. All right. So let's start off with Nassoon needed. Nassoon is, we are finding out, unusually strong. And it feels like maybe even more unusually strong than her own mother is. Because we know that Nassoon has some pretty intense innate ability. And I don't really, there's a sort of a surprise, I guess, to the fact that she has given birth to 2 origin children. It seems like the fact that Nassoon is as strong as she is and that her brother is as strong as she is not typical. But I'm going to start off this chapter reading the opening paragraph, because the way that this book is written is a little bit different. The last one, there's like a hint that all of these people are the same person, but I obviously didn't put that shit together the way that I should have, or maybe I wasn't meant to. But this one starts off like talking to us in a way that's like much more conversational than it has been in the past, because there's always been that second person perspective where it's like, you pick up this and you go here. And it's a really unusual way of telling a story. But it's never felt as if we are not part of the story at the time. The way it's used is present tense, as if it is describing something that we are in the middle of doing, versus this, which really talks to us as if the voice is aware that we are coming to this story and reading all of this afterward, which I think is really interesting. So it says, because you are Nassoon, I should not need to remind you that all Nassoon knew before Found Moon was Tirimo, and the ash-darkening world of the road during a 5th season. You know your daughter, don't you? So it should be obvious, therefore, that Found Moon becomes something she never believed she had before. A true home. So, I was thinking about this, and as somebody who is reading this story, when it says you, I'm assuming the author is speaking to me because you are Nassoon. But I started to think about it differently today. What if the author was writing this to herself? What if she is writing this saying, because you are Nassoon, she's having a conversation with herself, as you know what I mean? Which I feel like lends this a sort of, it's so much more melancholy that way, and so much more, almost there's like a reprimand to it that I don't know if that's, how she intended it or what she was thinking. It's really hard to know what her intention was with a few different things that I'm going to bring up. I think I get it, but it's so easy to misread symbolism, allegory, and intention when there's a story that has the many levels of psychology that this story has. So I'm not confident in this, but I feel like that rings true to me in a way that reading it as if the author's speaking to me doesn't. It's as if the author is channeling someone talking to her and sort of like judging her, but not in a way that feels, it's like the judgment of a separate part of her. Does that make sense? And that's, I posted when I shared the link to this episode, I said, come join me as I talk about a part of the Broken Earth series that will almost definitely make me cry. And I'm pretty positive it's going to happen, guys. So get ready for that. So we find out that Jeketi is the name of this village that used to be a city. And I actually found this really fascinating because I have started to wonder how much research this author has done. Like, it's obvious when she talks about origins, and the way that they manipulate temperature and mass and pressure and all of that, that she has definitely done research or has background in geology and has learned about how all of that works. When she talks about the ways in which various seasons have gone down and the ways in which whole groups of people have been wiped out, I have to think that is something that has been part of her research, is like the discovery of worst case scenarios, either what could happen theoretically if something went wrong a certain way, or historically things that have happened that we can maybe don't have proof of, that, but we can guess, and this one has something that, like, it's no more dramatic in its way than the other stories about calms and cities that have been wiped out. But what makes it stand apart for me is that part of this village still stands, whereas the others were talking about communities that basically got wiped off the face of the earth as if they never existed. And it's much more sort of heart-wrenching to me when there is a little something left that's just the shadow of what it had been. So Jeketi is, like I said, a village, but it had used to be a city. And interestingly, what happened was not due to a season. It was initially wiped out by a terrible fire. And eventually there was a lot of infighting because it says the comms headman died in the fire. And I have to confess that I first read that as headsman, and I thought that they were talking about like an executioner, and I was like, what the fuck? But no, they just mean like the chieftain. And 3 different people try to step forward to take control of the place, and all of the infighting led to people's energy being directed at basically stupid political shit rather than survival. They don't rebuild the walls fast enough, and a Tibbet run sweeps in, and it says a Tibbet run, small furred animals that swarm like ants when food is scarce enough, swept into the calm and took care of anyone too slow to get off the ground and the calm's ground level store caches. The survivors lasted for a time on what was left, then starved. By the time the sky cleared 5 years later, less than 5,000 souls remained of the 100,000 who'd begun the season. So it's a perfect storm, really, because they had been prepared to survive the season that had started before the fire happened. And they would have been okay. But the fire also wasn't the factor that caused them to collapse. The fire was what caused the opening for a new headman. But it was only the infighting and the inability for these people to just set aside that whole fucking argument and get some work done that was necessary. That was what led to these animals coming in. And they were driven here because of a season, and there was a lack of food. And it says, like, took care of anyone who was not quick enough in getting off the ground, which means, I guess, that they were swarmed by these small animals like mice or rats and just eaten alive, which is super duper horrifying. Like, I just can't even imagine. That's just a nightmare, you know? It's not as bad as the boil bugs, I feel like, but it's pretty horrifying. And what is left, this little calm that's like just basically the people that were able to hang on, who don't have a lot of skills, they managed to like sort of like blunder along, even though they're barely making it. There are still bad repairs done to the wall that like have never been updated or improved on. It says the comm has done a bad job of rotating old spoiled stores out and laying in new. Strangers have rarely asked to join Jeopardy over the years. Even by Antarctic standards, the comm is seen as ill-fated. Its young people usually leave to talk or marry their ways into other growing communities where jobs are more plentiful and the memory of suffering does not linger. When Shafa found this sleepy terrace farming comm 10 years before and convinced the then headwoman Maiti, I think it's Maiti, to allow him to set up a special guardian facility within the comm's walls, she hoped it was the beginning of a turnaround for her home. Guardians are a healthy addition to any community, aren't they? And indeed, there are now 3 guardians in Jeopardy, including Shafa, along with 9 children of varying ages. There were 10, but when one of the children caused a brief but powerful earthshake amid a temper tantrum one evening, the child vanished. Maiti did not ask questions. It's good to know the guardians are doing their jobs. So, that's a hell of an introduction. I think it's really important that we continually are reminded, despite the fact that the guardians are alarming, despite the fact that everybody can sort of see there's something not right about them, that they are still considered an asset and necessary and desirable to have around. I feel like there's a lot of symbolism behind that. Something that makes us really uncomfortable in a way, but also comforts us at the same time. I feel like there's something going on there. And this whole thing with Shafa, he is damaged in a way that it doesn't seem, and we'll get more to this later, but I wasn't sure how sincere he was about having like changed things or seeing things in a new way. And I'm starting to realize that I think he is actually pretty sincere, but he's also confused and mixed up. And that's so much more upsetting in its way than somebody who is actively trying to deceive people. It's like this, honestly, in a lot of ways, Shafa feels like a baby Origin, you know, somebody who has an incredible amount of power at their disposal, but doesn't really get it and doesn't understand like how to use it or what kind of danger it could really pose. It feels like he's starting to get it, and especially his conversations with Nasun, he seems to it's all thrown into sharper relief, I think, by having an outside perspective that he can see written on her face a couple of times. But all the same, the fact that there isn't a specific intention that he seems to even understand himself behind what he's doing makes everything so uncertain. And there is a lot of possibility and potential for things to go very badly wrong that I sense he is constantly trying to fight against, but I don't know about the other guardians that are working with him who also seem damaged for some reason. But we'll get to that later. So Nisun and her father, they move in basically. They're meant to only be staying for a little while because Jija got injured when they got attacked by that group of bandits that the Guardian takes out. And Nisun is tending to his injuries, and everybody is sort of stepping back and taking a look at these two, deciding whether or not to allow them to stay. And Maite especially is like listening to what people are saying about Jija. The fact that Jija is a stone napper is like very important because the walls, like I said, still have the old repairs on them. So like they need fucking help and apparently have not been able to retain it. And I really feel like Maitzi, the fact that they haven't repaired the walls yet, the fact that they're not cycling in and out their caches of food. Is it caches? And we're in the middle of a season. It hasn't seemed to have reached here quite yet based on the way that the forest is still functioning and everything. But nevertheless, Maiti does not seem like a good comm leader. She seems like somebody who is dedicated to like the people, but it doesn't feel like she's good with the organizational aspect of things. And I really wonder if that's going to lead to problems later. People are giving her good reports about Jija. And it says everyone notices how well behaved and devoted his daughter is too. Not at all what anyone would expect of a Raga. And again, the choice of language is super duper important. The fact that everybody is referring, or that we can speak as one voice for the village and use the word Raga. And that feels appropriate when you and I know that that's a slur. It's just a really crucial bit of information to remind us how these people see a child like Nisun, Her father eventually earns the name Jija Resistant Jeketi, but Nisun never is given that name because she's an origin, but she continues to use that name anyway when she introduces herself to people. And the place that she has really found a home is with the other origin children, with whom she does not have to disguise what she is or lie or anything. The first one is an older boy named Iitz, and he's about 18 years old and is attractive and just really gets Nisun's attention like out of the gate. She's just kind of into him. And then there are a couple of twins. I think they are at least sisters. And they each have like a very different look to them than anyone that Nisun has ever seen. And they ask to touch Nisun's hair, and she asks to touch theirs. And it says, this makes them all realize how strange and silly a request that is, and they giggle and become instant friends without a head petted between them. Again, super important, because I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with the trope of white people touching black women's hair. Black women especially. I don't know that I've ever actually even heard of this happening to a black man. But there is it's a similar thing to the entitlement of strangers with pregnant women's bellies. Have you guys seen this, where a total stranger will go up to a pregnant woman and lay their hand on her belly and be like, oh, how far along are you? And I've watched this happen and been deeply uncomfortable. And I have to admit, I think that internalizing that discomfort is a big part of what made being pregnant and having children so unappealing to me from such an early age, was that it seemed like everyone decided you were suddenly theirs once you were pregnant. And Black women experience something similar, but all the time. They don't need to be pregnant for this. And it's like so common for people to be like, oh, can I touch? And they like reach out before they've even finished asking the question and invade this person's space because they're fascinated by the different texture that a Black woman's hair has, to the degree and extent that they see her as like an oddity to explore, like she's not a person. And they don't understand how incredibly dehumanizing it is to the person who is on the receiving end, who is being othered by the fact that you're treating them like an animal in a petting zoo. And I have been around when people have tried to do it to Rashawn, and it is incredibly awful. There was one time where I didn't realize it was happening because I was in the middle of a conversation with someone else and we were in like a group of people. And a woman kept on trying to reach out and grab her dreads, and Rashawn kept pulling away. And the woman did not seem to register that Rashawn was not welcoming this and trying to, without words, signal, no, and pursued her to try and grab. And like Rashawn, I don't even remember what wound up happening because she told me about it later. I saw the woman reaching for her, but I didn't like process it until after. And she was so upset. And it was just one of those things that like, I have had that to a very small degree because my hair is super curly. And I went to a middle and high school with mostly white people who had straight hair. And people would definitely like boing my curls and stuff. But it is I am positive, a really different experience to what a Black woman experiences. And this whole thing of like two people understanding how weird it is to ask and then deciding not to even do it, I think is really a pointed moment. So all of the children are like, you know, learning how to control themselves. They are all very impressed with Nasoon's abilities because she is able to do things that are much more focused and advanced than any of them can manage. And Nasoon says, like, there's a young girl that had been in training to become a stone napper before the Guardians found her. And she wants to meet Nasoon's father because obviously he's a stone napper. She would like to learn something from this guy. And Nasoon has to tell her, like, I'll see like about warming him up to this idea, but definitely do not go and talk to him on your own. And the girl understands, but is very sad about it. And that breaks my heart a little bit. Like the simultaneous understanding and grief over how someone reacts to just you being, you know? So, and there's one girl in particular named Lashar who really looks down on Nasoon and tries to behave as if Nasoon is somehow beneath her in terms of like the way that she speaks and some of her mannerisms. But Nasoon doesn't feel like she can sense any difference between the two of them. And people eventually tell her that Lashar comes from a like kind of higher class upbringing before it was found out that she's an origin. So despite the fact that once you're an origin, none of that shit matters at all anymore, it's still ingrained enough in her. And it's, you know, understandable that when you have always had something to cling to make yourself feel superior, you are going to keep trying to find something to feel superior about once you are like brought down to this level. There's a girl named Shirk who is nicknamed that because she's tried to like get out of chores one time. I love that it was only once, but the fucking nickname is still there and nobody knows what her real name is. She won't tell. And a girl named Peak whose real name is Ziff, but Peek is P-E-E-K, because she always is looking around from behind somebody else because she's really, really shy. And she has a horrible scar on her face where her grandmother tried to stab her, and one of her eyes is gone, which I swear to God, I hate. Oh, God. So Nasoon is really like kind of becoming a bit of a superstar amongst all of them. It's not that she's like better than them. It's way, way better than them. It's like so many levels ahead that her taking the same sort of training that they are is sort of pointless and irrelevant. And when she tries to explain to them the way she manages to do things, it's really clear that they don't have any sort of frame of reference for the feelings and instincts that she's talking about. And even like Itz, who is the oldest, who she's attracted to, he's got a lot more training. He's older, but his orogeny is not strong at all. And he can't even do some basic shit that she just takes for granted, which one of them is described as make a cool spot to stand in on a hot day. And I'm just like, that sounds so amazing. It has been so hot here in Texas. And I really like going for walks and stuff. And I have not been doing it because it's so brutal out that you can't take a 10-minute walk without needing a shower after because you've soaked through your clothes with sweat. And it's a big pain in the ass. So being able to create a cool spot that I could just walk around in outside. Oh, how great would that be? So Shafa explains to her, training can only do so much. There's also ability that you're just born with, and you have a lot of it. And she mentions her father killing Uche because of it. And it says she keeps the words soft because they still hurt to say, and because she said them so rarely. Jija never wanted to hear it, so she has had no one with whom she could discuss her grief until now. Guys, grief is horrible. And the idea that there is exactly one person in her life who even knows who her brother was anymore, and she is not allowed to speak of this to him at all, and has to suffer through this by herself, is so horrific, especially for somebody as young as her, that I hate Jija anyway. I already do, but that, for some reason in particular, is so disgusting to me, so selfish, so deeply inhuman, that one got to me real, real bad. And she talks about how, that's all she has to say, actually. Shafa says, my brethren have done their job too well, I think, in warning the populace about the dangers of untrained origins. Not that any of those warnings were false, just exaggerated. And she says, she feels a flash of anger that this exaggeration is why her father looks at her with such hate sometimes. But the anger is nebulous, directionless. She hates the world, not anyone in particular. That's a lot to hate. He thinks I'm evil, she finds herself saying. And at this point, Shafa looks at her, and this is described as a strange look that he gets in his face. And Nasoon has been able to assess fleetingly these flashes of like silver through him occasionally that give him a lot of pain. And when he gets this look on his face, she knows that he's feeling that pain, and that sometimes it can be pulled down and muted. And the way that is managed is from smiling, because smiling releases endorphins, and that is something that helps to like dull it. But we'll get there. So he tells her that you're not evil, you're really special. You would have been quite advanced for somebody your age if you were in the fulcrum. It would have been almost unheard of. And she asks him if it's true that they can take their orogeny away from her, because she's thinking about trying to just be a normal person, a still. And he says that, yeah, you could, But she can sense that he wouldn't want that, even if they were able to do it. And he asks her to talk about her mother. And we find out that her mother broke her hand, just like Shafa had done to her when she was first brought to the fulcrum. And she uses it as a test to make sure, because Nasun is calling her mean and says that she doesn't want to learn how to do this anymore. She uses it as a test to ensure that no matter what Nasun experiences in life and how terrible it is, that she will be able to restrain herself. Guys, can you imagine having to inflict on somebody you love and care about the same thing that you remember as one of the worst, most painful moments of your life because you think it's going to help them? Like, there is something so deeply horrific that I don't even have words for that. And all I can see throughout these books is the allusion to living as somebody seen as dangerous, aka living as a black person, specifically in the United States, I think, period. And having to let your kids, experience something painful and terrible in the hopes that they will now understand, really understand what they're in for. Just as a person, this is what you have to show them. And she says that her mother tells her father, because afterwards Nasun gets very quiet for the rest of the year, and Jija remarks on it. And Mama says that's just something that happens when girls start to grow up. There was a thread on Twitter a while back, and somebody said, "Black people, tell me about the first time you felt betrayed by a white person." And it was stories from the age of 5, 3, of a white person accusing them of something. Teachers, frequently it was teachers, pointing out a black person in the class and calling them dirty. Doing things that othered them in a way that the child did not even really understand, just knew was painful. And obviously, Nasun has had that happen. But when it comes from your own family and it's meant as a kindness in its way, because they need you to really understand, that behavior that you've been experiencing is not an outlier. That behavior is the standard, and you need to be ready for how ugly it can get. You need to be ready for how bad things can turn really, really quickly, and know how to absolutely control yourself in a situation that an average person should not be expected to control themselves. She breaks her own daughter's hand and needs her daughter to not react with a scream. Nasun screams but does not use her originy. And it just, all all I could think was the many videos of black people being threatened at gunpoint by police, at gunpoint by civilians at times, and they have to keep a cool head because no matter what happens, they will be blamed if they get hurt. No matter what happens, they are expected to absolutely obey despite a threat on their life that would send most of us into an absolute panic, understandably. And even then, they can still be killed. I don't know how many of you have ever watched the video of Philando Castile being shot, but he is as calm as can be explaining to this officer who has him at gunpoint already that he has a weapon on him, that he has a license to carry it. He is shot in front of his partner who is driving. And she is still filming and still trying to stay calm as this man dies in front of her. And that's how she has to be. It's just, there's something so wrong, so deeply, deeply wrong. And as soon doing this to her daughter, it's genuinely preparing her. It really is. Like, that's what's so fucked up, is it's a horrible thing to do. And it's absolutely necessary. You know, like, oh, fuck. So, Shafa tells her that that was wrong. It's wrong to hurt someone you love. And she has a bit of a moment and is thinking it's wrong to hurt someone you love. It's wrong. It's wrong. It has always been wrong. But the thing is, Esun doesn't see it as hurting her in the long run. In the short run, yes. In the long run, she thinks it's helping. And so that doesn't really count. But of course, that is not what Nasun understands. Not yet. And I feel like she will. And that's going to be... There is nothing quite like the moment as you get older when you look back and start to realize some of the worst things, the moments when you hated your parents the most, were them genuinely trying their best. Like, oh. So she puts her hand to Shafa's, the back of his neck, because as he's holding her, he's hugging her in a way that nobody has in fucking forever. She puts her hand, and it says they are hungry, the threads. As she gets closer to them, they lick at her, seeking something. Curious, Nasun touches them and says, "What?" A faint tug. Then she is tired. And Shafa pulls away and asks what she's doing. And she says, "Well, you needed it. You were hurting." And he's like, "Yeah, I'm always hurting." And then he turns his head and realizes that for right now, he's not. And she asks, "Is it that thing in your head?" And he's like, "Wait, what?" And she says, "Oh yeah, I assessed it. There's something like in your neck. And you touch me occasionally on my neck to take something from me that makes it bother you less." And at this point, he reaches for the back of her neck, and she looks at him and knows that he is thinking about killing her. And he can see on her face that she isn't afraid. And he asks her why. And she says, "Well, I would assume you have a good reason." And he kind of loses it at that point and says, You have seen so much purposeless suffering that at least being killed for a reason can be borne. And he pulls away and he sighs and says, "Never speak of what you cess in me around the others. If the other guardians learn that you know, I may not be able to protect you. Will you tell me what it is? Someday, perhaps." He gets to his feet. Nassoon hangs onto his hand when he tries to pull away. He frowns at her, bemused, but she grins and swings his hand a little, and after a moment he shakes his head. Then they head back into the compound, and that is the first day Nassoon thinks of it as home. So, the next chapter is 10. I am 40 minutes in, and I've only really talked about the first chapter, so I'm gonna have to pick up the pace. I'm really excited because I believe it's Denise has actually commissioned some blocks of time in the future that are an hour and a half long, because I tend to go over when I talk about this book. So I'm looking forward to that. I wish that I had that this time, but what are you going to do? I'll probably be able to circle back and talk about some of this stuff again. And we are in Essoon's point of view, and she is remembering about all of the times, basically remembering how much she loves Alabaster and how that has become a part of her. He has become a part of her. And as much as she wants to hate him, she just can't do it. And Alabaster is telling her, he says, "I fought antimony all the way down." So remember at the end of the last book when shit starts to go left and antimony grabs him and pulls him under the stone. You're just like, what the fuck is happening? Well, it turns out that sort of saved him. And he gets dragged basically through the earth, and he can sense as he's going, even though he can't breathe, he's not dying. He can sense the moment where their mutual partner is shaken apart. If you guys remember when that happened, one of the most horrible things in the entire world. And the death of their child. And he talks about coming back to the surface again, and that there is a city on the other side, on a sort of island. It's almost I imagine it to be like a barrier reef or something that is just bare. It's hardly holding on, and it's built right near a volcano shield. The city sits directly above it on the ocean. There's nothing visible around it. And there is a hole in the center of the city. The hole goes into the volcano and beyond. The city exists to contain the hole. Everything about the city is built for that purpose. Even its name is Core Point. And he talks about how it's a ruin, but the streets haven't crumbled. The buildings are empty, but furniture isn't it's not made of natural material that decomposes. So I'm imagining plastic, maybe metal. I don't know. And he says you could live in even metal decays. So I guess it would be plastic, something like that. And he says there was nobody there but these stone eaters. There was nobody else to talk to. They say they didn't build the city, but it's theirs now and has been for tens of thousands of years. And that time frame is so outside of the realm of what they have thought was true about humanity and civilization and their world, that it's just almost more than they can understand. And he says, people have been around for much longer than that. Who knows when some version of our ancestors first crawled out of the ash? 30,000 years? 40? A long time to be the pathetic creatures we are now. All we make is better ways to do field surgery, better chemicals. Once we were so much more. And he says that Antimony was the only Stone Eater that would speak to him at first. And he thinks initially that this is because nobody else knows him, or maybe she's in charge. But it turns out that they just speak a whole other language. And he starts to learn parts of it, and when he speaks it, you can open doors and turn on lights with it. It sounds like technology that we have. It sounds like this is a civilization that was similar to ours, and then they tried to do some shit, and it went really, really wrong. And he describes something really similar to what Asun came across in the Fulcrum. This hole that has markers that light up as you come closer to it, and warnings about getting too close and all of this stuff. And he says, sometime in the ass end of history, some of our so smart ancestors decided to dig a hole to the heart of the world for no rusting reason. No, for power, Antimony said. I don't know how it was supposed to work, but they did it, and they made the obelisks and other tools to harness that power. Something went wrong, though. I got the sense that even Antimony didn't know exactly what. Or maybe the Stone Eaters are still arguing about it and nobody's come to a consensus. Something just went wrong. The obelisks misfired. The moon was flung away from the planet. Maybe that did it, maybe some other things happened, but whatever the cause, the result was the shattering. It really happened. That's what caused the seasons. And he says the dead Civ was run by Origines. We destroyed the world just like they always say we did. Ragas. And that's pretty intense to have to take on that sort of responsibility and find out that the reason everybody hates you, allegedly, has some basis in fact. That's fucked up. That's horrifying. And so what I picture is them digging this hole to try and access some sort of deep power and redirect it via satellites, kind of like the obelisks are satellites, almost like they're using them as power lines and being able to give electricity maybe to a variety of different communities spread way across the world by using this main source to power all of these other stones that are floating above major cities. That's how I imagine this would have worked. I have no idea if that's right. It's just a complete guess on my part. But he tells her that he jumps into the hole at one point. He thinks that he can go. It's not even totally clear. But he, first of all, tells her that the Stone Eaters, he's pretty sure, used to be people. And that somehow they have evolved into this other thing. Earth tried to make them more like itself, dependent on itself, thinking that would make them harmless. And when Esun realizes that Hoa is thousands of years old, and he looks like a child, and she remembers the moments when she finally stopped treating him like a person and how hurt he was, because he was trying to get back to feeling like a person. She feels really guilty, which yeah, that's it's just so sad, His sorrow when you stopped treating him like a human being. He'd been trying so hard, doing his best, failing in the end. So then he said, I'd been there 3 years and time got loose after a while. I'd been looking at diagrams of the obelisks. I knew you were alive and I missed you so much I was sick with it. I had this sudden wild half-rusted thought. Maybe through the hole I could get back to you. Which is so sweet because the two of them have such an antagonistic relationship in so many ways that imagining him missing her that much is just unexpected and makes total sense considering the length of time that's passed and that he's not around any other human beings, never mind Origines. But he jumps in And he says, the things around the hole are mechanisms, but not just for warning. I must have triggered something, or maybe that was how they were meant to work. I went down, but it wasn't like falling. It was controlled. Fast, but steady. I should have died. Air pressure, heat, the same things antimony took me through without the rock involved, but antimony wasn't there, and I should have died. There are lights along the shaft, windows. People used to live down there, but mostly it's just the dark. Eventually, hours or days later, I slowed down. I had reached, and he stops, and then he just says, the earth is alive. Some of the old stories are just stories, you're right, but not that one. I understood then what the Stone Eaters had been trying to tell me, why I had to use the obelisks to create the rift. We've been at war with the world for so long that we've forgotten this, but the world hasn't. And we have to end it soon, and he just stops there. And at this point, he tells her if he dies to give him up to antimony, which Asun hates the idea of. But she finally agrees to it. And antimony, Alabaster starts to get really tired here. And antimony comes down and holds him as Asun gets up and he begins to fall asleep. And she says the obelisk gate amplifies energies both physical and arcane. No single point of surface venting produces these energies in sufficient quantity. The rift is a reliable, high-volume source. So what they want her to do, because he said that they did this thing, it shoved the moon off course, and that has caused the seasons. Antimony tells her the moon is coming back. And she realizes what they want is for her to go to this city, channel this energy through the obelisks that are floating around, and catch the returning moon and return it to orbit around the planet with whatever power is coming out of the gate, which is insane. It's considering the rift that he was able to create, it makes a lot of sense that they have the action, that they even hope this is possible, but just, and she is thinking about I guess I don't have a choice. And Antimony's like, of course you do. And she says, and also not all of my kind want the same thing, which is an interesting little aside. Is she going to encounter some resistance in trying to do this? And I just have no idea where this is going. So eventually she just lays down to sleep. And I just was sitting there oh, okay, no big deal. Well, I got nothing on that. So we go back to Shafa here. It starts off him again. I wish he hadn't done so much to you. You don't like being him to any degree. You will like less knowing that he is part of Nasun. But don't think about that right now. Okay. I hate this so much. Shafa, because something has gotten messed up with his injury, Shafa is having dreams that he didn't used to be able to have. He wasn't capable of falling into the kind of sleep that allowed dreams, but now he can. And it turns out it's not really dreams, it's memories. And he remembers the dream is of his parents, and he has a suspicion his mother looks much more like him, but his father has a vibe like he's an Origin. And it says, warrant, black-walled rooms carved into layered volcanic rock, gentle hands, pitying voices. Shafa doesn't remember the hands or voices' owners. He is helped into a wire chair. No, the nodes were not the first to use these. So he and a bunch of other kids that are also, I believe, Origins initially, are held down in these chairs and surgically altered, and something metal is implanted in the back of his neck. Shafa remembers struggling, and even as a child, he's stronger than most. He gets his head and upper body almost free before the machinery reaches him. This is why the first cut goes so wrong, slicing far lower into his neck than it should and nearly killing him right there. The equipment adjusts, relentless. He feels the cold of it as a sliver of iron is inserted, feels the coldness of the other presence within him at once. Someone stitches him up. The pain is horrific, and it never really ends, though he learns to mitigate it enough to function. All those who survive the implantation do. The smiling, you see. Endorphins ease pain. Guys. He and the other guardians gaze down at a small, shredded body crumpled at the bottom of the pit. Every now and again the children find the place. Poor foolish creatures. Don't they understand? And I am figuring that this is the socket that Asun had found at the fulcrum. And there's all of these memories of traveling, seeing people, seeing him, and knowing something is wrong. He decides to sleep with a woman and takes this risk that he really shouldn't. But when he comes back, she's pregnant. And she says it is not his, but he doesn't really believe it. It's too uncertain. So he decides to try and kill just the baby. Hopefully she'll pass its corpse and live. But she's horrified, furious, and she calls out for help and draws a knife on her own as they struggle. Never again, he resolves, as he slaughters all of them. Her whole family, a dozen bystanders, half the town, as they attack him en masse. And then Lachette, who had been also a guardian, he runs across her, and she has aged. It's almost like something, like, did she get this thing removed? And that allowed her to, because she smiles at him in a way that is not meant to be mitigating pain. It's a genuine smile. And he freaks out as she approaches him and breaks her neck. And then he remembers Asun and breaking her hand. And he wakes up and realizes that is what is so familiar about Nasun. Or he remembers Demaya, sorry. But he remembers when he wakes up, like, that's what's so similar, that they obviously are related to each other. And he goes and sees her as she's asleep and asks her, "Are you afraid of me?" And she says, "Never." And it says, "Never." He swallows, his throat suddenly tight. "Good. Go back to sleep." "Never again," he whispers, and twitches with the memory of that, too. Then the feeling changes and his resolve refocuses. What happened before does not matter. That was a different Shafa. He has another chance now. And if being less than himself means being less than the monster that he was, he cannot regret it. There is a quicksilver lightning strike of pain along his spine, too fast for him to smile it away. Something disagrees with his resolve. Automatically his hand twitches towards the back of Nasun's neck, and then he stops himself. No, she is more to him than just relief from pain. "Use her," commands the voice. "Break her. So willful, like her mother. Train this one to obey." "No," Shafa thinks back, and braces himself to bear the lash of retaliation. It is only pain. So Shafa tucks Nasun in and kisses her forehead and puts out the light as he leaves. He heads for the ridge that overlooks the town and stands there for the rest of the night, grinding his teeth and trying to forget the last of who he was and promising himself a better future. Eventually, the other two guardians come out onto the steps of their cabin as well, but he ignores the alien pressure of their gazes against his back. And that is the end of his chapter. So, here's my theory. And again, I am filtering most of what I read here through the idea of white supremacy and race relations and racism and whatnot. Shafa is trying to get woke. Shafa has been implanted with ideas from a child before he even understood what was happening to him. He was subjected in his way to a kind of mutilation similar to what he winds up inflicting on other people later in life, but did not even understand what was happening and had no context for resisting it. And something has happened to shake him up, and he can see objectively his actions for what they were. He is able to look back on decisions made in a moment that felt completely reasonable at the time and see them from the outside now as monstrous, horrific things. And this thing is still there, and it hurts to resist what he has been taught and what a voice is still telling him to do somehow. But he is starting to understand, like, the damage that he has done, and is trying to resolve to do better, even though he doesn't really even know what that means or why he did what he did before or what. He is muddling through this with no blog posts and history books and whatnot to give him context for what's happened. And he can draw energy from a marginalized person to comfort himself. He can demand labor of them without them even really knowing, because they're too young, and make himself feel better and comfort himself with that. And that is what he used to do. And he is refusing now to subject the people that he is growing to love to that in exchange for his own comfort, which is a big deal. You know that you're starting, you can watch somebody go through the phases of really understanding white supremacy when they stop being defensive and stop asking to be told they're a good one. You're one of the good white people. You don't do that. When they stop requesting or even kind of passive aggressively trying to reassure Black people around them that they're a good one, that is when they really have started to get it, because they realize nobody cares. Whether you're a good one or not, whoop-de-fucking-do, you're starting to be like a person. Yay, congratulations. Nobody's throwing a parade for you. Whether you are #not all white people is just so not the point. And unless you're willing to do something to actually help and be better, shut the fuck up. Just shut up, And I am fascinated with this. I have no idea what's going to go on with Shafa. He may break. He may decide that he wants to get rid of this pain or listen to this voice in the end because it's so overpowering. And he may cave and hurt somebody. But I don't know. I'm just seeing Jason. I'm sorry that you were commenting and I didn't even see, and now I'm over time. But he says, I believe she was Alabaster Guardian. Oh, no shit. Okay. The woman that he wound up breaking her neck. Interesting. Well, I'm going to have to go back and check that out. I'm sorry. I should have thought of that. Oh, no, don't be sorry. I didn't even think of it either. It was Denise's idea to book longer, sessions later. But yeah, this book is really, it lends itself to so many layers of investigation and analysis that it is just, I can't believe how much time I can spend talking about a paragraph, you know, like this bitch, she knows what she's doing. I'm just saying. So yeah, thank you, Jason, for commissioning another one of these. There's others coming up, so stay tuned for those, guys. There's not gonna be too long a break, I don't think, this time. And I hope that you're enjoying the coverage. I'm sorry that I just wept into the microphone for like 10 straight minutes, but what are you gonna do? And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.